For 2 years, a retired Navy SEAL had lived with one unanswered question. Where had his German Shepherd gone? Then, during an evening animal rescue report, a mother German Shepherd appeared on the television, standing protectively over 2 frightened puppies inside an abandoned greenhouse. The torn left ear, the faded collar, the small green button still hanging by a thread. Could the stray mother dog really be Sadie, the companion Luke Bennett had lost 2 winters ago? And if Sadie remembered him, why did she refuse to let him anywhere near her puppies? What had happened during those missing years? And would Sadie ever choose to follow Luke home again? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below.
An early winter evening settled over Canandaigua, New York, with cold rain polishing the roads near the Finger Lakes.
How long could a person wait before hope stopped being hope and became a private form of punishment? Luke Bennett had asked himself that question for 2 years, though never aloud. At 43, the retired Navy SEAL was tall and broad-shouldered, with strong hands marked by old cuts and a right shoulder that stiffened in cold weather. His dark brown hair was clipped short and threaded with gray at the temples, while a neatly trimmed beard sharpened an angular face. Neighbors considered Luke controlled, capable, and difficult to know. A training injury near the end of his service had closed the door on the work that defined him, and Luke had answered by tightening every routine in his life. Sadie had been the exception. The black and tan German Shepherd had entered his home at 3 years old with upright ears, intelligent amber eyes, and a habit of stealing one glove from every pair. Luke had officially stopped searching after 7 months. The flyers faded, calls to shelters became less frequent, and the drives down unfamiliar county roads ended. Coyotes, traffic, winter, distance. There were too many possibilities and too little evidence. Yet Sadie's old stainless steel bowl remained in the lower kitchen cabinet behind mixing bowls he never used. A shallow dent marked one side from the afternoon Sadie had pushed it across the floor while chasing an ice cube. Luke could have thrown it away. Instead, he left it, hidden but close, like evidence from a case he had failed to close. That evening, Luke ate reheated chicken at the coffee table, while the local news played across the room. The television was usually background noise, a substitute for company that asked nothing of him. Luke barely listened as weather reports gave way to a segment about stray animal rescue efforts outside Geneva. The screen showed an abandoned greenhouse with cracked glass panels and weeds growing through the floor. A silver-haired female anchor in a navy blazer appeared beside the footage. The anchor had a narrow, thoughtful face, gentle brown eyes, and the restrained manner of someone who understood that suffering did not need theatrical language to feel important. The anchor explained that volunteers had located a mother German Shepherd and 2 puppies beneath broken planting tables inside the unstable greenhouse. Luke looked up because of the breed. Nothing more, he told himself. The mother dog appeared in shaky footage taken from a distance. The adult German Shepherd was thin enough that the curve of her ribs showed beneath dirty black and tan fur. Her left ear carried a small notch, and a long, pale scar ran beneath her rib cage. 2 German Shepherd puppies, perhaps 7 weeks old, huddled behind the mother dog. The larger puppy had a dark mask, partially raised ears, and oversized paws that seemed borrowed from an older dog. The smaller puppy had softer tan markings and uncertain brown eyes, pressing tightly against the mother dog's hind leg as though physical contact were the only promise the little animal still trusted. The mother dog turned toward the camera, and recognition stirred inside Luke without taking shape. Her face was older and leaner. Her amber eyes had acquired a guarded stillness Sadie had never possessed inside Luke's home. Many German Shepherds had similar markings. Many had scars. Many had notches in their ears. Then the camera moved closer to the dog's neck. A weathered leather collar hung loosely against the matted fur. The leather had darkened from rain, dirt, and years of exposure. From one frayed section dangled a small green button, held by a single pale thread. Luke stopped breathing. The button had once belonged to Claire's childhood coat. Claire Bennett, Luke's 24-year-old daughter, was tall and slender like her late mother, with fair skin that freckled across her nose in summer, long chestnut hair and gray-blue eyes that became very still whenever she was hurt. As a child, Claire had been quick to laugh and forever rescuing small creatures from gutters, window wells, and roadside ditches. As an adult, Claire had learned to hide that tenderness behind dry humor, especially around Luke. Years earlier, after the metal ring on Sadie's collar had broken, Claire had sewn the green button beside the identification tag. "Now she carries a piece of home," Claire had said. 2 years ago, on the night Sadie vanished, Luke had accused Claire of leaving the back gate open. The argument had begun with one sharp question, and ended with words neither of them could retrieve. Luke remembered Claire standing in the kitchen with rainwater dripping from her hair, her pale face exhausted, and her eyes turning colder with every accusation. Luke had wanted an explanation. What Luke truly wanted was someone to blame. Claire left before sunrise and moved to Albany soon afterward. Their contact narrowed to brief holiday messages and occasional replies that felt more like formal acknowledgments than conversation. Luke told himself he had lost a dog and a daughter on the same night. He had never seriously asked whether either loss had begun with him. Luke reached for his phone. The station transferred him to the rescue hotline, where a calm woman with a measured voice asked for the dog's name, veterinary records, microchip number, and identifying marks. Luke answered too quickly, as though speed might prevent the animal from disappearing again. "Her name is Sadie. She would be 5 now. The left ear has a notch from a fence injury. The green button was sewn on by my daughter." The woman explained that several people had already claimed to recognize the dog. Any person claiming ownership would have to provide photographs, veterinary files, adoption documents, and microchip information. Luke promised all of it. He could send everything within minutes. Then the woman added something that cooled the urgency in Luke's voice. The mother German Shepherd was highly defensive. Volunteers had been unable to approach within 20 feet. The dog guarded both puppies, avoided humane traps, and reacted strongly whenever an adult male entered the greenhouse. The volunteers did not know what had happened during the previous 2 years, but the dog's behavior suggested that survival had taught her to consider strangers dangerous. "Even if she is your dog," the woman said gently, 2 years can change an animal. Recognition may not mean trust." On television, the silver-haired anchor repeated nearly the same warning. "A mother dog can remember a person," the anchor said. "But remembering does not mean she still trusts them." The footage returned to the abandoned greenhouse. Sadie lifted her head and looked directly into the camera. For one suspended second, Luke saw the dog who used to wait outside his bedroom at dawn. The dog who knew when his shoulder hurt before he admitted it. The dog who carried Claire's green button as though home could be fastened to a collar. Then one puppy shifted behind her. Sadie moved sideways at once, placing her scarred body between the camera and both small animals. Luke stood in the quiet room, his phone still pressed to his ear. "Sadie," Luke whispered. Through the television speakers, the mother German Shepherd lowered her head and gave a deep, unmistakable growl. Morning came pale and windless outside Geneva, New York, leaving a thin skin of frost over the abandoned nursery grounds. The greenhouse stood beyond a sagging chain-link fence, its long glass roof broken in several places, and its metal frame dark with rust. To most people, the structure looked empty. To Nora Bell, it had been occupied for 4 months by a mother who trusted almost no one, and 2 puppies who had never known a safer world. Nora was 74, short and narrow-shouldered with warm brown skin, silver hair cut close around her ears, and dark eyes made cloudy at the edges by worsening cataracts. She had spent 38 years as an elementary school librarian, a profession that had trained her to notice the children who stood apart from the others, and the books returned with pages wrinkled by tears. Retirement had not cured that habit. Nora still watched carefully, listened before speaking, and distrusted anyone who mistook authority for wisdom. She had discovered the German Shepherd at the beginning of winter. Nora had been walking behind the greenhouse with a canvas grocery bag when she saw movement beneath a collapsed planting table. The adult dog had dug a shallow hollow into the soil beside an old heating pipe. Two tiny puppies lay against the mother's stomach, their eyes barely open, while cold air passed through the broken walls above them. The dog rose immediately. Even weakened, the mother German Shepherd had looked formidable. Mud clung to the black and tan coat, the ribs showed. One ear bore a small notch, and a pale scar curved along the left side. The dog did not bark. The dog simply lowered the head and watched Nora with a stillness more serious than noise. Nora placed a can of chicken on the ground and stepped backward. That became the beginning of their arrangement. For 4 months, Nora carried food to the greenhouse every morning. At first, she left it near the fence, then beside the broken door.
Eventually, she was allowed to place the bowl inside, though never closer than 15 feet from the hollow beneath the table. Nora learned the rules through mistakes that were small but unmistakable. Do not stare directly into the mother dog's eyes. Do not stand between the German Shepherd and the puppies. Do not enter while the mother is eating. Never reach for the old leather collar, no matter how loose or damaged it appeared. The only time Nora attempted to touch the collar, the dog snapped close enough for Nora to feel breath against her fingers. Nora did not try again. That morning, the rescue van arrived shortly after Luke Bennett's dark pickup. Luke stepped from the truck wearing a heavy charcoal jacket over a dark sweater. In daylight, Nora saw the full shape of him. Tall, broad across the shoulders, with short, dark brown hair graying at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and an angular face that seemed built to conceal uncertainty. Luke carried a waterproof folder under one arm. He moved with controlled efficiency, checking the fence, the broken roof line, and the rescue equipment before greeting anyone. Nora knew the type. Men who had survived by giving orders often believed every problem was waiting for the correct command. A second vehicle stopped near the gate. Rachel Monroe, the field coordinator for Finger Lakes Animal Recovery, climbed out, carrying a humane trap and a coil of rope. Rachel was 38, athletic and compact, with olive skin, curly black hair pulled into a tight bun, and alert green eyes. A faint scar crossed her chin from a dog bite early in her career. The injury had not made Rachel afraid of animals, but it had taught her never to confuse fear with aggression. Luke introduced himself and immediately opened the folder. He had brought printed photographs of Sadie sleeping beside a stone fireplace, Sadie running across a summer field, Sadie sitting next to a younger Claire. He had veterinary records, adoption papers, vaccination certificates, and a microchip registration number. The records were organized by date and protected in clear plastic sleeves. Rachel examined everything without making promises. Nora looked at one photograph longer than the others. Sadie appeared younger there, heavier and relaxed, with the same green button sewn beside the identification tag. Claire stood in the background, laughing with one hand raised as though she had just thrown something beyond the camera. "That is her," Luke said. Nora lifted her eyes from the photograph. "That proves she lived with you." Luke's jaw tightened. "She was my dog." "Was," Nora repeated. The word changed the air between them. Luke looked toward the greenhouse. "I know her name. I know her commands. I know what frightens her." Nora studied him. Luke's confidence did not look dishonest. It looked old. It belonged to a life in which knowing the plan had once kept people alive. But Sadie was not standing in that old life. Sadie had spent 2 years without him and 4 months raising puppies under broken glass. "Paper proves you once owned her," Nora said. "It does not prove she still wants to belong to you." Luke's expression hardened, but he did not answer. A white city truck approached along the service road. The driver, Paul Haskins, was a heavy-set municipal inspector in his late 50s, with a red face, thinning sandy hair, and a gray mustache stained faintly by coffee.
Paul was not cruel, but years of inspecting condemned structures had made him blunt. He handed Rachel an official notice stating that the greenhouse had shifted after recent rain. Demolition crews would arrive the following morning. "The eastern frame is failing," Paul warned. "Nobody should be inside after today." Luke glanced at the roof. "Then we get them out today." Again, Nora heard the command hidden inside the sentence. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. The screen showed the name, Daniel. Nora's son was 49, a careful, broad-faced man with thinning black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient voice of someone who had spent 20 years managing a pharmacy. Daniel worried in practical lists: medication, stairs, locks, transportation. Since Nora had fallen twice in 6 weeks, he had begun sending information about senior communities near Rochester. Nora rejected the call. Her left knee still carried a yellow bruise from the second fall. Her vision blurred in dim light, and driving after sunset had become impossible. She had told Daniel neither of those things. Nora understood why her son worried. She also knew how quickly concern could become permission to decide for someone else. That was partly why Sadie mattered. People saw an aging woman and began discussing where she should live. People saw a frightened dog and discussed who should claim her. Very few asked either one what safety might look like from the inside. Rachel prepared a humane box trap near the greenhouse entrance. She placed warmed chicken at the back and covered the metal floor with an old blanket to soften the sound. Nora sat 20 yards away on an overturned bucket. Luke stood farther back, every muscle in his body resisting stillness. The smaller female puppy appeared first. The little German shepherd had soft, tan eyebrows, a dark saddle, and ears that folded sideways when uncertain. Hunger pulled the puppy forward one trembling step at a time. Sadie watched from behind a broken table, body low, amber eyes moving between the trap, Nora, Rachel, and Luke. The puppy entered. The door closed with a metallic clap. Sadie exploded from the shadows. The mother dog lunged toward the trap, barking with a raw panic Nora had never heard before. The larger male puppy followed, frightened but unwilling to leave Sadie. Rachel moved to secure the trap, but Sadie seized the attached drag line between her teeth and pulled. The trap scraped across the concrete. The rescued puppy cried from inside. "Do not chase her," Rachel shouted. Sadie released the line, spun toward the remaining puppy, and drove the little male deeper into the greenhouse with her body. Luke took one step forward. Nora caught his sleeve. "Not like that!" Before Luke could respond, a cracking sound traveled through the greenhouse roof. Everyone looked up. A rotten wooden support beam broke free from the eastern frame and crashed across the interior passage. Glass burst downward, scattering across the floor in bright fragments. Dust rose behind the fallen beam, swallowing the last glimpse of Sadie and the male puppy. Paul Haskins stared at the blocked entrance. His face dreamed of color. "The demolition crew comes at sunrise," he said. Beyond the beam, somewhere in the dangerous half of the greenhouse, Sadie barked once. Then everything went quiet. Before dawn, cold mist lay over the abandoned nursery outside Geneva, and the broken greenhouse seemed to float in the darkness, like the ribs of some enormous animal left to decay. Portable work lights threw white circles across the frost. The demolition crew had not yet arrived, but Paul Haskins had given the rescuers a narrow window to enter through a side service door before the eastern frame became too dangerous. Rachel Monroe remained outside with the rescued female puppy, who trembled beneath a fleece blanket inside the heated van, while Luke Bennett prepared to follow a canine behavior specialist into the damaged structure. The specialist was Mara Ellis, a 46-year-old woman of medium height with a sturdy build, copper-brown skin, and thick, gray-streaked hair braided down the center of her back. Her dark eyes were steady rather than soft, and a pale burn scar crossed the back of her right hand. Mara had spent 19 years rehabilitating abused and abandoned working dogs. Earlier in her career, she had believed patience alone could heal every frightened animal. A German shepherd she pushed too quickly had bitten through 2 tendons in her hand.
teaching Mara that kindness without respect could become another form of force. She wore a hard hat, a faded canvas jacket, and knee pads over her work trousers. Before entering, she looked directly at Luke. "Inside, you follow my instructions," Mara said. "Not because I know Sadie better than you did, because neither of us knows who Sadie is now." Luke disliked the sentence immediately. He had spent years entering uncertain places under the authority of people who trusted his judgment. Being told to remain behind a civilian animal specialist struck something in him that felt embarrassingly close to insult. Still, he nodded. The male puppy was trapped somewhere beyond the fallen support beam, and Luke understood that pride was a luxury the puppy could not afford. They entered through a warped metal door on the western side. Luke carried a pry bar and a compact lifting jack. Mara carried food, a slip lead, and a folded blanket. Nora Bell followed as far as the safe interior boundary, despite Rachel's objections. Nora's short silver hair disappeared beneath a borrowed hard hat, and her cloudy eyes narrowed against the glare of the work lamps. She moved slowly because of her bruised knee, though she pretended the stiffness came from the cold. The fallen beam divided the greenhouse diagonally. A narrow space remained beneath one end where the rotted wood rested against a concrete planting bed. Mara crawled through first. Luke followed, his broad shoulders scraping rusted metal. Nora stayed on the safer side, able to see through the broken frame but unable to cross. Sadie stood 30 feet away beneath a row of collapsed watering pipes. The male German Shepherd puppy pressed against the mother dog's side. The little male had a dark face, oversized paws, and one ear standing higher than the other. Dust covered the puppy's coat, but no obvious injury showed. Sadie's body remained thin and scarred, her head low, her amber eyes fixed on Luke. For a moment, no one moved. Luke felt recognition before he saw it. Sadie's ears shifted forward, then slightly outward. Her nose lifted. The nostrils trembled as she tested his scent beneath the smells of damp soil, rust, dust, and fear. The tension in the mother dog's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Sadie leaned toward Luke as though an invisible cord had tightened between them. Luke's chest hurt. That small movement contained mornings by the lake, muddy paw prints across the kitchen, and Sadie sleeping beside his chair while Claire studied at the table. Luke heard the old life calling from inside the present one. He believed, for one reckless second, that all he needed was the correct word. "Sadie," Luke said, lowering his voice into the calm command tone he had once used during training. "Come." Sadie's ears snapped back. Luke extended one hand, palm down. "Come here, girl." The change was immediate. Sadie lowered her body, bared her teeth, and stepped sideways to place herself fully between Luke and the puppy. A growl traveled through the greenhouse, deeper than the one Luke had heard through the television. Luke froze, not from fear, but from humiliation. Sadie had obeyed him in rain, crowds, thunder, and once during a house fire 2 doors down. She had trusted his voice when alarms screamed and strangers ran in every direction. Seeing her reject that voice now felt like being denied by the last witness to the man Luke believed he had been. "She never refused me before," Luke said. The anger arrived before grief could find a place to stand. Luke hated that about himself. Anger was faster, cleaner, and easier to carry. Grief asked questions. Anger gave orders. Mara remained crouched with her body turned partly away from Sadie. "That was before she survives 2 years without you." Luke's jaw tightened. "You are calling an old dog," Mara continued quietly, "inside a body that has lived an entirely different life." From behind the beam, Nora watched Luke's hand close around the pry bar. Not threateningly, but with the unconscious pressure of a man trying to hold himself together through his grip. Nora recognized the look. Daniel wore it whenever Nora rejected another brochure for senior housing. People often called control protection when admitting fear felt too exposed. "Sit down," Mara told Luke. "Turn your face away.
Do not call her again." Luke stared at her. "Now." He lowered himself onto a broken paving stone. The movement pulled at his injured shoulder, but he said nothing. He placed the pry bar on the floor and turned his head toward the cracked greenhouse wall. Every instinct in him argued that waiting was failure.
Yet Sadie's growl softened when his eyes left her. Nora noticed the green button hanging from the old collar. Even beneath dirt, the color remained strangely bright. "Who sewed that button on?" Nora asked from behind the beam. Luke did not look back. "My daughter." "The young woman in the photograph?" "Claire." Nora waited. Luke exhaled through his nose. "Claire left the gate open the night Sadie disappeared." "Did you see her leave it open?" Luke's silence answered before his mouth could. Nora's expression did not change. "Sometimes adults hand guilt to their children because guilt is lighter than pain. Then, when the child stops speaking, the adult calls the silence disrespect." Luke turned toward her sharply, but a metallic scrape cut through the greenhouse. An old irrigation pipe shifted from the collapsed rack above Sadie. The pipe rolled down a slanted board and struck the male puppy's front leg. The puppy cried out and fell. A second length of pipe followed, pinning the small paw against the concrete. Luke surged to his feet. Sadie lunged. The mother dog placed herself over the puppy, teeth exposed, her bark cracking through the glass structure. Luke stopped only a few feet away, lifting the pry bar instinctively. Mara spoke without raising her voice. "Put it down. The puppy is trapped, and Sadie believes you are the greater danger." Luke looked at the shaking puppy, then at Sadie's wild, exhausted eyes. Every part of him wanted to move faster than fear. That instinct had once saved lives. Here, it would make the situation worse. Luke slowly placed the pry bar on the floor. Then he stepped backward. One step, another. He lowered himself again and turned his shoulders away. Sadie remained over the puppy for several seconds. Her breathing was harsh. Gradually, the teeth disappeared behind her lips. The mother dog looked at the pipe, then at Luke. Sadie moved forward cautiously. The green button swung beneath her throat. She stopped beside the pry bar, touched the metal tool with her nose, and then turned toward the trapped puppy. Sadie pressed her muzzle against the pipe before looking back at Luke. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. It was permission for one temporary act. Late morning brought a hard blue sky over Geneva, New York, while the wind moved cold and clean across the veterinary clinic parking lot. Sadie and both German Shepherd puppies were safe inside. With Sadie's temporary permission, Luke had used the lifting jack to raise the irrigation pipe just enough for Mara to pull the male puppy's paw free. The leg was bruised, but not broken. Sadie had allowed the rescuers to guide the family from the greenhouse only after Nora carried the trapped female puppy ahead where the mother could see her. Now, Rachel Monroe and the clinic staff were treating dehydration, parasites, minor infections, and old wounds. Luke sat in a consultation room surrounded by printed reports, veterinary notes, screenshots, and handwritten dates. He had once imagined Sadie's missing years as a single dark road leading away from him. The records showed something more difficult to accept. Sadie had not followed one road. She had been carried through 100 small moments in which people had tried, failed, forgotten, assumed, or arrived several hours too late. The first fragment came from a traffic camera, recorded in the night Sadie disappeared. The image was grainy, distorted by rain, and nearly useless until Rachel enlarged one corner. A German Shepherd crossed Route 21 shortly after midnight, running north with a torn leash dragging through the water. Lightning whitened the road behind her. Luke watched the short recording 6 times. Sadie's shape appeared for less than 4 seconds, but he recognized the long stride and the way the left ear tilted when frightened. The date burned in the corner of the screen. It was the same night Luke had received the final medical decision from the Navy. The damage to his shoulder was permanent enough that he would not return to operational duty. He remembered the envelope on the kitchen counter. He remembered thunder. He remembered anger. Until that morning, he had told himself those memories were separate from Sadie's disappearance. The second fragment belonged to Walter Griggs, a 61-year-old long-haul truck driver from Ohio. Walter was a stocky man with a weather-darkened face, a thick white mustache, and pale blue eyes made tired by 40 years of interstate nights. He spoke over the telephone from a rest stop in Pennsylvania, apologizing before Luke had accused him of anything. Walter remembered finding a soaked German shepherd beside a gas station nearly an hour from Canandaigua. The dog had blood on one paw, and no one nearby seemed to recognize her. Walter had called the number on the identification tag, but the call went directly to a disconnected line recording. Believing the dog had been abandoned, Walter placed her in the passenger side of his cab, wrapped her in a work blanket, and continued east because his delivery could not be delayed. "She watched every road behind us," Walter said. "Didn't sleep until dawn. I thought I was taking her somewhere safe." 2 days later, Walter delivered Sadie to Berkshire Valley Veterinary Clinic near Troy, more than 170 miles from Luke's house. The clinic records had been signed by Dr. Emily Carver, a 52-year-old veterinarian with a tall, straight-backed frame, fair skin, auburn hair streaked heavily with gray, and practical hazel eyes. Emily had spent most of her career treating farm animals and injured strays, which had made her compassionate without making her sentimental. Her notes described Sadie as underweight, frightened, and unwilling to enter a kennel unless the door remained open. The clinic scanned the microchip. A registration appeared under Luke's name, but the telephone number belonged to the apartment he had left 18 months earlier. Luke had moved after separating from the service and never updated the microchip database. The clinic called the old number 3 times, sent a letter to an outdated mailing address, and contacted 2 regional shelters. None of the messages reached him. Sadie remained at the clinic for 12 days before space ran out. The next name in the file was Susan Delaney, a 44-year-old elementary art teacher who lived with her husband and teenage son on a small farm outside Troy. Susan was a broad-hipped woman with freckled cheeks, reddish hair usually tied in a loose braid, and a generous nature weakened by an unfortunate belief that affection could solve anything quickly. Susan agreed to foster Sadie until an owner was located. Her photographs showed Sadie asleep beside a wood stove, walking along a fence, and watching cars pass from the porch. The Delaneys did not mistreat her. They fed her well, gave her space, and continued posting online. But Sadie remained restless. On the 4th of July, neighbors launched illegal fireworks from a nearby field. One explosion struck low enough to shake the farmhouse windows. Sadie forced through a loose section of screen, cleared a 4-foot fence, and disappeared again. After that, the trail became thinner. A shelter intake report placed a German shepherd matching Sadie's description near Utica in August. A grocery store camera captured a lean dog stealing bread from a delivery crate in September. A highway worker reported seeing a shepherd following the railroad embankment west in October. None of the sightings lasted long enough for capture. There was no villain hidden in the paperwork. Walter had tried to help. Dr. Carver had followed the available information. Susan had offered a home. Shelter staff had compared photographs. Every person had done something, but no one possessed the whole map. Luke had spent 2 years wanting one person to blame because one person could be hated. A chain of incomplete kindness was harder to punish. Rachel eventually found the final fragments in Nora's notes. By early winter, Sadie had reached the abandoned greenhouse outside Geneva. Nora's first entry described a thin female German shepherd with an enlarged abdomen and fresh mud beneath her paws. Several weeks later, the 2 puppies appeared beneath the planting table. Somewhere during the missing months, Sadie had survived mating, pregnancy, birth, and the first dangerous weeks of motherhood without a permanent shelter. Luke looked through the clinic window. Sadie lay in a recovery enclosure with both puppies pressed against her stomach. The old green button remained attached to the collar by one pale thread. Sadie had carried it through highways, clinics, fireworks, hunger, and winter. Luke wondered whether the button had reminded Sadie of home, or merely of a place that had failed to keep her safe. He stepped outside before calling Claire. The number had remained in his phone, though he had not used it for nearly 2 years. Claire answered after the 5th ring. Her voice was lower than Luke remembered, controlled and guarded. Luke told her Sadie had been found. For several seconds, Claire said nothing. Then she asked whether Sadie was alive, whether the puppies were healthy, and whether Luke had touched her. Luke answered each question. Finally, he said he had discovered the microchip still carried his old number. "That wasn't the only thing you forgot," Claire said. Luke closed his eyes. Claire told him what had happened that night. Luke had opened the back gate himself while carrying boxes from the shed. After reading the Navy's medical decision, he had left the gate unlatched and walked into the rain, furious with his own body and ashamed that his career had ended without his permission. Sadie had followed. Claire had gone after the dog alone. She searched through the storm, slipped beside a drainage ditch, and fractured her wrist. She returned near dawn, soaked, shaking, and unable to lift her left hand. Luke remembered the bandage. He also remembered refusing to ask how the injury happened. "You decided it was me before I came home," Claire said. "You needed someone standing close enough to blame." Luke opened his mouth, but no defense came. He had spent years remembering Claire near the gate, though he had never actually seen her open it. He had edited the night until his anger fit comfortably inside it. "Will you come see Sadie?" Luke asked. The silence lasted long enough for Luke to hear traffic passing beyond the clinic. "I'm not coming for you," Claire said at last. "I'm coming for Sadie." The call ended. Luke sat alone on the cold bench outside the veterinary clinic. Behind the wall, Sadie rested beside 2 puppies born during years Luke could not recover. For the first time, he remembered the storm without moving the gate, the blame or his own hands to more convenient places. 3 days later, a weak winter sun rested over the Finger Lakes Animal Recovery Center, turning the frost along the chain-link fences into a pale silver line. Sadie and the 2 German Shepherd puppies occupied a quiet rehabilitation room at the back of the building, away from barking dogs, ringing telephones, and the constant clatter of metal bowls. The medical examination had found malnutrition, intestinal parasites, a mild skin infection, and several old injuries that had healed without proper care. The scar beneath Sadie's ribs came from a deep cut rather than surgery. 2 toes on her rear paw had once been fractured and mended slightly crooked. None of the injuries threatened her life, but together they told a story no document could fully explain. Sadie had survived by continuing forward long after comfort ceased to be available. Luke arrived every morning shortly after the center opened. He brought nothing Sadie had not been approved to eat, made no attempts to open the enclosure, and never again used the old command voice. Instead, Luke sat in the corridor outside the glass-fronted rehabilitation room, with a newspaper folded across one knee and an antique radio resting on the other. The radios came from a box he had found in his garage. Cracked wooden cabinets, rusted dials, cloth-covered wires, and small internal parts that demanded patient hands. Luke had once repaired them during sleepless nights after leaving the Navy. Restoring a damaged radio required precision, but it also required accepting that some components could not be forced. A wire pulled too hard would break. A dial turned too quickly would strip its teeth. Luke understood that lesson in machinery more easily than he understood it in living things. Sadie watched him from the rear corner of the enclosure. She remained thin beneath the clean black and tan coat, and the old leather collar hung loosely around her neck. Whenever Luke shifted too suddenly, Sadie rose and positioned herself between him and the puppies. She allowed Rachel and Mara to change bedding and administer medicine, though only after careful warnings and slow movements. Luke was permitted to exist beyond the glass, nothing more. The male puppy was beginning to find Luke interesting. The little German Shepherd's bruised paw had improved, and he now walked with only a slight hesitation. He approached the glass when Luke worked, following the movement of the screwdriver with bright brown eyes. Once, when a loose radio knob rolled across the floor, the puppy pounced against the glass as though the black plastic circle were prey. Luke almost laughed. The sound rose in his chest but emerged only as a breath.
The smaller female puppy remained beneath Sadie's body whenever Luke moved.
Her dark ears folded backward, and her tan paws pressed close beneath her chest. She trusted Rachel's food bowl and Nora's quiet voice, but Luke's size and deeper tone still made her disappear beneath her mother. Luke could dismantle a radio in minutes. He could identify damaged wiring by smell. He could not explain to a frightened puppy that he intended no harm. Patience felt worse than danger. Danger gave Luke something to do. Patience required him to remain present without control, without reward, and without knowing whether the waiting would change anything. He could not shorten the process through training, money, physical strength, or the authority he once carried. Every morning, Sadie was free to reject him again. Claire arrived on the fourth afternoon. Luke recognized her through the lobby window before the front door opened. Claire Bennett was tall and slender, with long chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail and fair skin lightly freckled across the bridge of her nose. Her gray-blue eyes resembled those of her late mother, especially when she was protecting herself. At 24, Claire carried herself with a deliberate independence, shoulders straight and expression composed. 2 years away had changed small things. Her hair was shorter than Luke remembered. A thin silver ring circled one thumb. She wore a dark green coat and held both hands inside the pockets as if she had already decided there would be no embrace. Luke stood. Claire looked at him for one measured second, then turned toward Nora. Nora had been seated near the rehabilitation room, knitting a narrow strip of blue wool despite the cloudy edges of her vision. Claire greeted the older woman first, thanked Nora for feeding Sadie through the winter, and listened while Nora explained the puppy's progress. Only after Claire had crouched near the glass and allowed both puppies to study her did she acknowledge Luke again. "Hello," Claire said. "Hello, Claire." The words were ordinary enough to belong to strangers. Before either could attempt more, Daniel Bell entered the corridor, carrying a brown pharmacy bag and a folded brochure. Nora's son looked more tired than he had during his earlier phone calls. His broad face was clean-shaven, his thinning black hair carefully combed, and his wire-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose. Daniel's usual patience had worn thin after discovering the bruises on Nora's knee and an unopened letter from an eye specialist. "You fell twice," Daniel said. "You stopped driving at night, and you told nobody." Nora continued knitting. "I told myself." "That is not the same thing." Daniel placed the brochure beside her. It advertised an assisted living community near Rochester. Bright photographs showed smiling older couples drinking coffee beneath artificial trees. "I am not moving because I missed a step," Nora said. "You did not miss one step. You fell twice and hid it." "I hid it because every time an old woman drops something, somebody starts measuring her for a smaller life." Daniel's face tightened. His concern was not false. Years of managing medications for elderly patients had shown him what happened when pride met an unforgiving staircase. But Nora heard only a door being closed before she had chosen to leave. Luke understood Daniel's impulse. Identify the danger, remove the danger, complete the task. Luke also saw Nora's hands gripping the knitting needles, not with weakness, but with anger at being discussed as though age had removed her from her own future. Claire did not defend either of them. Instead, Claire sat beside Nora and asked, "How do you want your life to continue?" The corridor became quiet. Nora looked at Claire. Daniel stopped gathering the papers he had brought. Even Luke felt the question enter a place in him that had remained unnamed. Not, "What can we do with you?" Not, "Where should we put you?" Not even, "How can we help?" "How do you want your life to continue?" Nora's voice softened. She wanted to stay in her house. She wanted brighter lights, a railing beside the back steps, and someone to drive her after sunset. She would accept an eye examination. She would not accept being removed from her home without first being allowed to make it safer. Daniel sat down slowly. He did not agree to everything, but he began listening.
A faint scrape came from the rehabilitation room. Sadie had risen. The mother German shepherd stepped away from the rear corner, leaving both puppies behind. Her amber eyes remained fixed on Claire. Claire did not call her, extend a hand, or speak the dog's name. She simply turned slightly sideways and rested one palm against her own knee. Sadie crossed the enclosure. When Rachel quietly opened the interior safety gate, Sadie moved into the visiting space and stopped in front of Claire. The dog inhaled near Claire's fingers. The notched ear lifted. Something old and tender passed through Sadie's guarded face. Then Sadie pressed her forehead against Claire's knee. Claire's mouth trembled, but she did not cry. She lowered her hand only after Sadie lay beside her feet. The worn leather collar shifted against Sadie's neck. A final, weakened section split with a dry snap. The collar fell to the floor, and the green button bounced once before coming to rest between Claire and Luke. Claire picked it up. Luke held out no hand. Claire closed her fingers around the button and kept it. A gray afternoon settled over the Finger Lakes Animal Recovery Center, and a light rain tapped against the high windows with the patient rhythm of fingers waiting outside a locked door. Luke Bennett sat across from Claire in a quiet consultation room that smelled faintly of coffee, disinfectant, and damp winter coats. Between them stood a small, square table with nothing on it except the green button Claire had recovered from Sadie's broken collar. Claire had placed the button near her right hand, but kept her fingers folded around one another, as though touching it too often might awaken something she was not yet prepared to carry. Luke had rehearsed several versions of the conversation during the drive. In one version, he explained how the Navy had trained him to make decisions quickly. In another, he described the medical letter that ended his operational career, the uselessness he felt afterward, and the humiliation of discovering that his own shoulder had become an order he could not disobey. He could have told Claire that Sadie's disappearance arrived on the same night his identity collapsed. Every explanation was true. None of them belonged at the beginning of an apology. Claire watched Luke without helping him. Her long chestnut hair was loose around her shoulders that day, and the pale freckles across her nose stood out against skin made tired by the drive from Albany. Claire's gray-blue eyes held no dramatic anger. Luke would almost have preferred anger. Anger could be answered. Claire's expression carried something quieter, the caution of a daughter who had learned that any vulnerable sentence might later be used against her. Luke rested both hands on his knees. "I knew there was a chance I was wrong," Luke said. Claire's eyes shifted slightly, but she did not speak. "I did not see you leave the gate open. I knew I had carried boxes through it. I knew I had been angry. I knew my memory of that night was incomplete." Luke forced himself not to look toward the window. "But I blamed you anyway because blaming you was easier than admitting I had lost control." The sentence sounded smaller than the damage it described. That was another unpleasant truth about apologies. A few words were expected to cross distances built over years. Claire looked down at the green button. "You didn't just blame me," Claire said. Her voice was calm, but Luke heard the effort beneath it. "You decided who I was. Careless, dishonest, someone who could hurt Sadie and then lie about it. You chose that version of me before I came home." Luke remembered Claire standing in the kitchen with rain dripping from her coat and one wrist swelling beneath her sleeve. He had demanded answers while refusing to hear any that made him responsible. "I was wrong," Luke said. "Losing Sadie was terrible," Claire continued. "I looked for her until I couldn't feel my hand. I thought she might be hurt somewhere and waiting for us, but that isn't why I left." Luke remained still. "I left because I realized you could remove a person from your life just to protect the belief that you were right." Claire finally looked at him. "You didn't need proof. You needed someone to carry what you couldn't." Luke felt the old instinct rise, to explain the letter, the shoulder, the storm, and the years in which hesitation had carried consequences. He let every defense pass through him without giving it a voice. "I am sorry," Luke said. "Not for being upset,
not for misunderstanding. I am sorry for choosing to punish you when I already knew I might be wrong. I am sorry I made my pain your responsibility." Claire did not say she forgave him. She did not reach across the table. And Luke did not ask whether they could start over. Starting over was a phrase used by people who wanted the past cleared away before anyone had examined what remained beneath it. The silence between them lasted almost a minute. This time the silence was not a weapon. It did not slam a door or demand surrender. It gave the apology room to exist without becoming a bargain in which Luke offered regret and expected immediate love in return. Claire picked up the green button and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Sadie's waiting," she said. Before they entered the behavioral room, Luke and Claire drove to Nora Bell's house with Daniel. Nora's small red brick home stood on a quiet residential street outside Geneva, surrounded by bare maple trees and a narrow garden sleeping beneath wet leaves. The back steps were steeper than Luke expected, and the porch light cast a weak, yellow circle that did little for Nora's declining vision. Nora had agreed to an eye examination the following week. She had also agreed to practical changes, though she insisted on approving each one herself. A metal handrail would be installed beside the back steps. Brighter LED fixtures would replace the dim hallway lights. A small emergency call button would be connected to a device Nora could wear around her wrist. Daniel and 3 nearby households would rotate evening visits and rides after sunset. Luke offered to cover the expenses. Nora refused. "I did not ask to become anyone's project," Nora said, standing in the kitchen with both hands around a chipped floral mug. Her silver hair caught the brighter temporary lamp Daniel had brought, and the clouding in her eyes was more visible than before. "I have savings. Daniel has offered some money. The neighbors have offered work. You may help, but you may not purchase the right to make decisions." Luke recognized the boundary and, for once, did not test it. Nora paid for the new lighting. Daniel bought the emergency system. Luke covered the materials for the handrail, then worked beside 2 neighbors who volunteered their labor. One was a retired carpenter with bent shoulders, a tobacco-gray beard, and the slow precision of someone who trusted measurements more than promises. The other was a cheerful, middle-aged woman with cropped blonde hair who lived across the street and admitted that she had been waiting years for Nora to ask for anything. Nora stood nearby and corrected the height of the rail twice. No one argued. The house did not become a symbol of rescue. It remained Nora's house, modified according to Nora's decisions, supported by people who were finally learning the difference between helping and taking over. By evening, Luke and Claire returned to the recovery center. Mara prepared the behavioral room with 2 blankets, a low water bowl, and an open safety gate connecting the space to Sadie's enclosure. The male puppy watched from behind the barrier, his dark face bright with curiosity. The smaller female puppy remained pressed close to Sadie, though she no longer hid completely beneath her mother. Luke entered alone at first. He sat on the floor with one knee bent, turned his body sideways, and rested his hands loosely against his legs. He did not call Sadie. He did not offer food. He did not extend his fingers for her to smell. Claire stood outside the glass with Nora and Mara. Sadie watched Luke for several minutes. The mother German shepherd's body stayed oriented toward the puppies, even when she finally stepped through the safety gate. Sadie crossed half the room, stopped, and tested the air. Luke felt the old desire to say her name. He allowed the desire to pass. Sadie approached from the side. The scar beneath her ribs shifted as she breathed. She leaned close enough to smell Luke's shoulder, the place where injury had changed both their lives. Then Sadie stepped away and turned once before lowering herself onto the floor a few inches from Luke. Her head remained raised. Her ears followed every sound from the puppies. Luke did not touch her. "Don't reach for her," Claire whispered through the partially open door. "Let trust wake up on its own." Luke stayed still until his hip ached and both feet became numb. Eventually, Sadie's breathing slowed. The notched ear relaxed. Her head settled onto her front paws.
With her body still facing the two puppies, Sadie closed her eyes and slept beside Luke for the first time in 2 years.
Late winter loosened its grip on the Finger Lakes, leaving patches of dark earth beneath melting snow and a thin, restless wind moving through the bare maples. At the recovery center, Sadie's coat had begun to shine again. The hollow spaces along her ribs were filling out, the infection beneath her fur had cleared, and the stiffness in her rear paw no longer appeared with every step. Both German Shepherd puppies had gained weight. The larger male had become bold enough to steal towels from the laundry cart, while the smaller female still approached unfamiliar spaces with her belly close to the floor and one eye fixed on her mother. Their bodies were healing. The question of where those bodies belonged proved more complicated. Luke entered the placement meeting believing the decision had already been made. He sat at the long table with Rachel, Mara, Claire, and Nora, his shoulders squared beneath a dark flannel shirt. Sadie's veterinary records and Luke's ownership documents rested in a neat stack before him. The microchip was registered in his name. He had provided photographs, adoption papers, and years of medical history. To Luke, the evidence formed a straight road home. "All three come with me," Luke said. "Sadie won't be separated from the puppies." Rachel folded her hands over a yellow legal pad. "No one is recommending separation right now." "Then there's no problem." Mara leaned back slightly. The gray streaks in her long braid caught the overhead light. "There is a question." Luke's jaw tightened. He had learned that people often used the word question when they had already reached a conclusion they expected him to resist. Mara asked whether Luke's house had quiet rooms where Sadie could withdraw without being followed. She asked whether the puppies would have a secure outdoor space, how Luke handled disrupted schedules, and what would happen if Sadie refused to enter a room or reacted badly to a visitor. She asked whether Luke expected to restore the household he remembered or accept the one Sadie now required. Luke heard suspicion inside every sentence. "That dog lived with me for years," he said. "I know how to care for her." Claire sat opposite him, her gray blue eyes steady. "You knew how to care for the Sadie who lived with us before." Luke looked toward her. The correction struck the same wound Mara had touched inside the greenhouse. Everyone seemed determined to remind him that the past did not grant authority over the present. His house was safe, his property was fenced. He had resources, experience, and time. Yet Rachel spoke of assessment periods, environmental adjustments, and voluntary contact as though Luke were applying to meet a stranger. "They're my family," he said, and the force in his voice silenced the room. Nora looked at him over the rims of her reading glasses. The new lenses from her recent examination made her eyes appear larger and clearer, though surgery would eventually be needed for the cataracts. "Family is not the same as possession." Luke nearly stood. Anger moved through him with familiar speed, offering the relief of certainty. He could take the documents, call an attorney, and prove the legal facts. Sadie belongs to him before she disappeared. The microchip did not care about emotional arguments. Then Luke saw the green button in Claire's hand. She had brought it to the meeting and was turning it slowly between two fingers. The object had survived because it had been attached to Sadie. It had not kept Sadie safe. It had not prevented her from leaving, being carried away, or building another life. It had only remained with her. Luke heard his own words again. "They're my family." The sentence was not wrong. The meaning beneath it was. He had said family when part of him meant mine. Luke lowered himself into the chair. "What would a trial look like?" he asked. Rachel explained the plan. Sadie and both puppies would stay at Luke's house for 30 days under a monitored reunification agreement. Luke would create a private area where Sadie could retreat with the puppies. No forced handling, no old obedience drills unless Sadie invited engagement and Mara approved them. Rachel would conduct home visits. Luke would keep notes on eating, sleeping, startle reactions, and voluntary contact. Claire and Nora would visit independently. Luke looked between them. "To inspect me?" "To observe Sadie," Rachel said, "and to say honestly if she is not adjusting."
The final arrangement would depend not only on the old microchip, but on Sadie's behavior, health, and sense of safety. Luke agreed. The words felt like surrender until he understood that surrender was not always defeat. Sometimes it meant putting down the part of oneself that kept frightening everything nearby. Over the following week, Luke altered the house. He placed non-slip rugs across the hardwood floors and installed gates that could divide the living room from the kitchen without making the space feel like a cage. The guest room became a quiet den with low bedding, covered crates left open, water bowls, and a clear path to the fenced yard. Luke removed the old metal training whistle from its hook near the back door. He did not throw it away. He placed it in a drawer. Claire helped secure loose cords and block narrow spaces where the puppies might become trapped. Nora inspected the yard from a kitchen chair and declared that the latch on the side gate was an insult to common sense. Luke replaced it without argument. At the abandoned nursery, a different kind of preparation had begun. After an engineering review, the city demolished the unstable eastern section of the greenhouse, but preserved the stronger western frame. Paul Haskins supervised the work with the grim concentration of a man who trusted old buildings only after they had proven themselves twice. Broken glass was removed, the surviving metal arches were reinforced, and the concrete beds were cleared. The recovery center turned the space into an outdoor rehabilitation yard. Nora organized feeding records and volunteer schedules in a thick green binder. Twice a week she sat beneath the reinforced frame and read stories to visiting children, while recovering animals observed from protected enclosures. Claire designed large, simple signs with clear lettering and illustrations so older volunteers could participate without lifting heavy supplies. One sign explained how to sit near a frightened animal without staring. Another reminded visitors that stillness could be a form of kindness. The greenhouse had once hidden Sadie from people. Now it became a place where children, older adults, and frightened animals practiced being near one another without demands. On the evening Sadie left the center, the sky over Canandaigua was clear and cold. Luke drove slowly, with Sadie and the puppies secured together in the rear compartment. He spoke only when necessary. At the house, he opened the vehicle door and stepped away. The two puppies tumbled onto the driveway. Sadie followed, sniffing the cold air. She recognized the yard. Luke saw it in the sudden lift of her head and the way her body became completely still. Sadie walked along the fence, examined the maple tree, and stopped near the back gate. The new latch gleamed beneath the porch light. When Luke opened the kitchen door, the puppies approached the steps. Sadie did not. The mother German shepherd lay on the porch, with both puppies beside her, facing the open doorway but refusing to cross it. Luke could see the warm room beyond, rugs, blankets, water, and the old life rearranged to make space for the new one. He considered using her name. Instead, Luke went inside, switched off the brightest lights, and sat on the kitchen floor. He left the door open despite the cold. He did not offer food or issue an invitation. Hours passed. Near dawn, the male puppy climbed the steps and crossed the threshold, drawn by curiosity. The smaller female hesitated, then followed with quick, nervous paws. Sadie remained outside. Luke sat without moving. At last, the mother dog rose. She stood at the doorway for a long time, half in darkness and half in the weak kitchen light. No leash pulled her. No command summoned her. Sadie lowered her head, stepped across the threshold, and entered by choice. Spring arrived slowly in Canandaigua, New York, softening the frozen ground and drawing pale green buds from the maple trees. Several months had passed since Sadie crossed Luke Bennett's kitchen threshold by choice, and the house that had once seemed too orderly for ordinary life had become almost unrecognizable. The male German shepherd puppy had grown into a long-legged, dark-faced troublemaker who carried Luke's socks into the yard with the solemn concentration of a dog performing important public service. The smaller female puppy remained more cautious, but caution had not prevented her from stealing wooden radio knobs and hiding them beneath Sadie's bedding. Mornings now began before Luke preferred, usually with claws tapping across the hallway, a water bowl being pushed against a cabinet, or two young dogs wrestling beside his bed as though sunrise required their personal assistance. Sadie had regained a healthy weight.
Her black and tan coat shone beneath the spring light, though the old scar along her ribs remained visible whenever she stretched. The veterinary team had approved the permanent placement after weeks of observations, home visits, and careful notes. Sadie slept near the puppies most nights, but sometimes Luke woke to find her lying outside his bedroom door, not inside, not pressed against him, simply nearby. Luke never called the position proof that everything had returned to normal. Normal belonged to the past. What they had now was something less polished and more honest. Luke and Claire were not the father and daughter they had once been. Some Sunday meals passed with conversation limited to the dogs, the weather, or whether the greenhouse volunteers needed additional supplies. Claire still lived in Albany. She still said Luke more often than Dad, especially when old tension entered the room. There were telephone calls that ended too quickly and silences that remained uncomfortable. But Claire came most Sundays. Luke learned to call before making plans involving her. He no longer announced that he would pick her up or assumed she would attend that event because he wanted her there. He asked. Sometimes Claire said no. Luke practiced accepting the answer without turning disappointment into punishment. That change appeared small from the outside. To Claire, it was one of the first signs that the apology had not been merely a collection of correct words. Sadie carried damage that affection did not erase. During an early spring festival, distant fireworks cracked over the lake. Sadie dropped to the floor and crawled beneath the kitchen table, panting hard as both puppies pressed against her. Luke turned off the lights, closed the curtains, and sat several feet away without touching her. The male puppy recovered quickly. The smaller female began hiding pieces of food under an armchair for nearly 2 weeks afterward. No one scolded her. No one pretended that a warm home made hunger forget itself. One Sunday afternoon, Claire brought a new leather collar. It was soft, dark brown, and wide enough not to rub against the scarred fur on Sadie's neck. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a needle, heavy thread, and the green button resting in her palm. The button had faded slightly during the missing years, but its color still held. Luke watched Claire sew it onto the new collar. The stitches were uneven. One loop sat higher than the others, and a short piece of thread remained visible beside the button. "You could hide that end," Luke said carefully. Claire looked at the crooked stitching. "I could." She left it exactly as it was. Some repaired things did not need to pretend they had never broken. Sadie accepted the collar after sniffing it for nearly a minute. Claire fastened it without pulling, and the green button rested beneath the dog's throat again. Not as proof of ownership, but as evidence of a history that had survived without remaining unchanged. Nora Bell continued living in her red brick house. Her cataract treatment had improved her vision, the brighter lights made the hallways safer, and the new handrail beside the back steps was used more often than Nora admitted. Daniel still checked on his mother regularly, but he had stopped arriving with senior community brochures. Nora wore the emergency call device on her wrist, though she complained that it made her look like a very small police dispatcher. At 74, Nora became the oldest regular volunteer at the Greenhouse Rehabilitation Yard. She recorded feeding times in the thick green binder, read stories to visiting children, and corrected anyone who tried to rush a frightened animal. Nora was no longer fully independent in the way she had once defined the word. She accepted rides after sunset, allowed neighbors to carry heavy food bags, and asked Daniel to accompany her to medical appointments. But receiving help had not turned Nora into a passive person. She still chose the help. That difference mattered. In May, the local television station returned to the greenhouse for its first broadcast about the new program supporting stray mother dogs and young litters. The reinforced western frame now sheltered shaded recovery pens, benches, storage cabinets, and a small reading corner for children. Sunlight passed through the remaining glass panels and fell across the concrete in warm, irregular shapes. The producer asked Luke to stand alone before the camera and describe the moment he recognized Sadie on television. Luke refused. "If you tell it that way," he said, "it sounds like I found her." Luke asked Nora, Claire, Rachel, and Mara to stand with him. The camera also showed the volunteers who repaired the structure, the veterinary staff who treated the dogs, and the children learning how to sit quietly near recovering animals. Nora explained how Sadie had survived the winter beneath a planting table. Rachel spoke about the rescue. Mara described the difference between recognition and trust. Claire said nothing about forgiveness. Claire simply stood beside Sadie with one hand resting near the green button. The story no longer belongs to a retired Navy SEAL who recovered a missing dog. It belongs to everyone who kept Sadie and the puppies alive while Luke was absent, and to Sadie, who had decided for herself when each person could come closer. A week after the broadcast, Luke worked in the yard while the dogs chased one another across the grass. He carried gardening tools through the side gate, became distracted by a loose fence board, and left the gate open. Luke noticed several minutes later. The sight stopped him where he stood. An open gate, spring air moving through it. Sadie beyond the fence. For one terrible breath, 2 years collapsed into the present. Luke felt the storm, the medical letter, Claire's broken wrist, the disconnected phone number, and every road Sadie had traveled without him. Sadie walked toward the end of the quiet lane. The puppies remained inside the yard, watching their mother. Luke's body prepared to run. His mouth shaped itself around the old command. He did neither. Sadie reached the line of maple trees and stopped. The green button caught the lowering sunlight. She turned and looked at Luke. Luke stood beside the open gate with his arms at his sides. The silence between them was long enough to hold every mistake he could not undo. Then Sadie turned around. The 2 puppies raced toward her, collided with each other, and rolled across the grass in a tangle of paws and offended dignity. Sadie passed them, walked steadily up the lane, and crossed through the open gate. Luke closed it only after Sadie had returned. The green button had locked nothing. It had not closed the gate, shortened the road, or prevented loss. It could not keep Sadie beside Luke. It only reminded him that love was not the power to make someone unable to leave. Love was becoming a place they could choose to return to. Sometimes a miracle is not a door that suddenly opens. Sometimes it is a heart that finally stops forcing the door. Luke believed love meant protecting, holding on, and never losing control. Sadie taught him something harder. Real love gives another soul room to choose. Claire taught him that an apology is not a bargain for forgiveness. Nora showed that accepting help does not mean surrendering dignity. Their lives changed not because the past disappeared, but because each person learns to face the truth without running from it. Perhaps that is how God often works in everyday life. He does not always erase the scars. Sometimes He uses them to teach patience, humility, and mercy. He may return what was lost, but not in its old form. The greater miracle may be that we become ready to receive it differently. Think about the people in your life. Are you loving them, or trying to control how they stay? Is there an apology you still owe, or a silence that needs gentleness? Share this story with someone who may need its message. Tell us in the comments what Sadie's return meant to you, and subscribe for more stories of hope, healing, and second chances. May God protect you, guide your heart, and lead every lost soul safely home.